Howdy y'all, how y'all doing? Good to see you again, good to see you back with me, the Whiskey Novice, and some whiskey reviews. This is review number 15, and we have come to America, with a bourbon, Makers Mark. Distilled and aged, bottled by Makers Mark Distillery, Star Hill Farm, Loretta, Kentucky, USA. Now you'll always find with bourbons, or I tend to find with most bourbons anyway, there's lots and lots of information on them, which means nothing. It doesn't really bring anything to the table. Speaking of tables. I mean, there's a whole great story on this here, but any time you're in the neighbourhood, stop by, visit our distillery, blah, 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 blah. Maker's Mark is America's only handmade bourbon whiskey, never mass-produced. Each individual batch is less than 19 barrels, and this small quantity means we can be choosy about everything we use and everything we do to craft our whiskey. That's why we use the old-style sour mash method. We start each new batch fermentation by using a little of the last, resulting in a more consistent product, which, well, fair enough, give them that. We're proud of our unique and full flavoured handmade bourbon, and so we add our Maker's Mark, something to each bottle. Enjoy, which must be just a signature. So yes, Maker's Mark bourbon, made in Kentucky, bourbon whiskey. What makes bourbon bourbon? It has to be matured in new oak. That is what makes bourbon bourbon. American whiskey is something different. You can have American whiskey, but it is made in used oak. Bourbon must be matured in new oak. So you take your new oak barrels, they char them, and then they mature them. Very rarely will you find an age statement on bourbons. It's particularly this side of the pond. Maybe in America you'll find more of them with age statements. They're getting bourbons, craft bourbons and stuff like that there, which you'll find an awful lot more of there, which we just won't get on this side of the water. What have I told you? This, it's Maker's Mark, actually distillery owned by Beam Suntory, and there's a reason why I picked Maker's Mark to represent bourbon as my first step away from, well, I've come away from Ireland and gone from the UK and Europe, basically. I've come to America to see this particular bourbon because, for one, it's fairly readily available this side of the pond. Two, it's fairly affordable this side of the pond as well. I've always found that you'll pick it up at a good price generally. And the other reason why I've picked this one is because there is no rye in the mash bill. What do I mean by that? Well, I've mentioned mash bills before. That a mash bill is basically the recipe for what goes in. And Maker's Mark, the mash bill is 70% corn, 14% barley and 16% wheat. There is no rye in the mash bill. And the reason why I didn't want any rye in the mash bill was my next review, I want to do a rye whiskey. And at that point then I was looking for very definitive taste profiles, which would split up a rye whiskey and a mash bill with no rye in it. So I did have my reasons. Sometimes I do actually think things, not very often, but sometimes. So this is Maker's Mark, and the other reason I picked it was to say it's affordable, it's readily available, and it's good. I've had it before. As you can well see, this is probably, in the time that I've been drinking whiskey, which is over quite a few years, I mean this is probably the third or fourth bottle of Maker's Mark I've had. It's not necessarily always something that I'll have in my collection, but when I see it at a good price, I'll buy it. Straight into the nose, it's bottled at 45% which is healthy. It's a good, I mean, they don't really mess about. I say 45%, that's ABV. Obviously, the one thing that you will see on a lot of bourbons is proof. They talk about proof in an awful lot in America and Canada rather than ABV. Basically, basic terms, proof will be twice what the ABV is. Proof is an old way of defining how strong a spirit was, and the story goes that it's based on the soakage of gunpowder. That if you soaked the gunpowder in this spirit and it lit easily, or I'm saying gunpowder, maybe shot, something anyway, but if it lit easy, it meant that it was above a certain proof. It was proof that it was above this level of alcoholic volume. I'll not, it's an old story. I imagine it's the truth. Let's just say it's the truth and move on, shall we? Anyway, straight into the nose. Initial hit is, I'm going to say vanilla cream, if that makes sense, because it's heavy vanilla, but it is a really creamy vanilla. It's not, wouldn't be vanilla initial, just vanilla essence or something like that. It's like cream and vanilla. Toffee, which I suppose comes hand in hand with that. Oak, there is oak there, light oak, but it's definitely there, and I mean I suppose that makes sense because you're going into new oak barrels. That oak is soaking up an awful lot. Brown sugar. Orange. I'm going to say there's a hint of orange, but real good. One of those great big Jaffa oranges, where it's just freshly sliced. There's a slight cola note. Yeah. Pear drops. It's acidic, and I'm going to say even acetone. There's a hint of acetone. I hate to say it because it's really, you think of acetone, you're thinking of like nail varnish remover or something like that, but it's definitely there. But it all works together very, very well on the palate. Oh, oak spice, toffee yet again. Beautifully rich. Got even hints of coffee and cherries in the background. Cream soda. Yeah, definitely cream soda and caramel. I'm saying cherries actually. This is even better than I remembered. If there was a Black Forest Gatto almost in liquid form, this has got some of it in it. And I mean, I know Black Forest Gatto's got kirsch in it, which is another spirit, but there's a creaminess. It's basically that cream and chocolate and cherries, and even tiramisu. There'd be a hint of like tiramisu off it. Finish. It's long and spicy. Cream soda stays there. Very slight tobacco leaf hit. I really had forgotten how good that was. Now you'll not, yet again, it's like a lot of them that I've rated before, that I've said it before, that this is going to taste different now than it did taste up here, because I know that, as I say, I generally have a bottle of this in my collection. This bottle has been in my collection for a year or more maybe. So it has sat away. As much as whiskey doesn't really mature much in a bottle, but it oxidizes in a bottle. So when the air's there and the air's getting to it, it is changing it. There's no way around it. I tell a lie, there is a way around it. You can buy a spray which is really for wine enthusiasts, but it works with anything, any spirit I suppose, really. And it forms a blanket of air, of I think has argon or something that's in it, which it basically forms a blanket and stops the spirit then oxidizing. So you're not really changing it. But to a certain extent, I quite like to know where the spirit's going to go. I suppose if you're going to keep bottles for years and years and years, and it's stuff that you really want to appreciate and look after and never want it to change, then this is good stuff. But I quite like to see where the whiskey's going to go, because as I say, from a neck pour it'll taste like something. By the time you get down to here, it's going to taste like something slightly different. And it's no bad thing, I don't think. As I say, it gives you an idea where it's going to go. Highly recommended as a bourbon. I would definitely buy this again. What am I going to give? I'll give it 7.5 out of 10. I'm not going to go any higher than that. The reason I'm not going to go any higher than 7.5 out of 10 is, part of my problem with bourbons is I find a lot of them quite hard to differentiate between. Some bourbons, the only way I can differentiate is I either don't like them or I like them, and this would be a like, but I find it hard to differentiate between this and other bourbons that I like. However, it is good stuff, and I would recommend it. 7.5 out of 10 for Makers Mark. As I say, I'll stay in America for my next one, but I'll see you then. And I would like to say once again, thank you for your continued support. Thank you for joining me, and here's to your good health. Cheers. Hey, thanks for watching my video. Please click and subscribe to be notified of further content.